Most hunters think they need a magnum to drop a whitetail. They don't. Every season I see the same thing: massive muzzle blast, heavy recoil, and a hunter lifting his head off the stock at the shot. The deer runs. Then we blame the caliber. But here's the truth. Whitetail deer are not elk, not moose, and certainly not Cape buffalo. They're thin-skinned animals, and within normal hunting distances, you don't need overwhelming power. You need control. A manageable rifle, a well-designed bullet, and precise shot placement will outperform raw recoil every time. When you flinch, you miss. When you stay steady, the deer drops. So before you reach for the biggest rifle in camp, ask yourself this: are you choosing power, or are you choosing precision? Now let's talk about the caliber war. Every hunting camp has it. On one side, the .300 Winchester Magnum crowd insisting that bigger is always better. On the other, the .308 shooters claiming it's the perfect balance of power and practicality. And then there's the .223 group constantly defending themselves against the same criticism. .223 is unethical for deer. The debate gets loud, emotional, and sometimes personal. Hunters argue about knockdown power, energy numbers, and what their grandfather used 30 years ago. But here's what rarely gets discussed. How far are we actually shooting? How well do we really handle recoil? And how often does ego influence our choice more than effectiveness? Most whitetail deer are harvested well under 300 yards. At those distances, several common calibers perform remarkably similarly when paired with the right bullet and proper shot placement. So before we draw battle lines between magnums and mid-calibers, we need to step back and ask an honest question. Are we choosing a rifle based on real-world performance, or are we overthinking it and letting pride make the decision for us? To really understand this discussion, we have to step away from opinions and look at biology. Whitetail deer are relatively thin-skinned animals. Their rib bones are light compared to larger big game species, and their overall body mass is far smaller than many hunters imagine when they choose oversized calibers. Even a mature buck does not have the heavy muscle density or bone structure of western big game. Now compare that to an elk. Elk are significantly larger, with thicker bones and heavier shoulders designed to carry more weight and endure harsher environments. The difference in size and structure is substantial. Yet many hunters choose calibers for whitetail that were originally popularized for elk-sized animals or even larger species. That mismatch is where confusion begins. When you examine the anatomy of a whitetail, the vital zone is accessible and does not require extreme penetration from high recoil magnum cartridges at typical hunting distances. A properly constructed, expanding bullet placed in the heart-lung area will pass through ribs without difficulty. The goal is controlled penetration and effective expansion, not unnecessary overkill. This is not buffalo. It is not moose. It is not a dangerous game animal built like a tank. A whitetail is a medium-sized, thin-skinned deer, and understanding that simple biological fact changes the entire caliber conversation. When we match our equipment to the actual anatomy of the animal, the need for excessive power starts to disappear. Now let's bring this back to reality and talk about distance. The vast majority of whitetail deer are harvested inside 300 yards. In fact, many are taken well under 200. Tree stands, food plots, timber edges, and field lines rarely demand extreme long-range capability. Yet hunters often select calibers as if every shot will be stretching across a canyon. When you zero your rifle properly, most common deer calibers from .223 to .308 and even 6.5 Creedmoor have very manageable bullet drop within that 300-yard window. If you sight in a couple of inches high at 100 yards, your trajectory remains relatively flat through typical hunting distances. We are not talking about dramatic differences that suddenly make one cartridge magical and another ineffective. In practical field performance, factors like recoil management, follow-through, and shot placement matter more than minor variations in ballistic charts. A rifle that allows you to stay steady, maintain sight picture, and break a clean shot will outperform a harder kicking cartridge that causes hesitation or flinching. Real-world hunting is rarely about pushing limits. It is about controlled, ethical shots within reasonable distances. Once you acknowledge that most deer are taken under 300 yards, the conversation shifts away from maximum power and toward practical effectiveness. And that shift changes everything about how we choose a caliber. At the end of the day, everything comes down to shot placement. You can debate calibers all you want, but if the bullet does not pass through the vital zone, none of it matters. The vital zone on a whitetail, heart, and lungs is relatively large and well positioned behind the front leg. A clean hit in that area disrupts oxygen flow and results in a quick, ethical harvest. There are two common approaches hunters discuss: aiming just behind the shoulder for a classic double lung shot, or intentionally taking the front shoulder to break bone and anchor the deer in place. Both can be effective when executed properly. A behind-the-shoulder shot often preserves more meat and allows for full expansion through the lungs. A front shoulder shot sacrifices some meat, but can immediately drop the animal by breaking structural support and impacting vital organs at the same time. This is where bullet design becomes critical. An expanding hunting bullet is built to open up on impact, transfer energy efficiently, and create a wider wound channel. Controlled expansion ensures adequate penetration while maximizing internal damage in the vital area. A poorly constructed bullet or poor placement can lead to unnecessary tracking and suffering. No caliber can compensate for a misplaced shot. Precision and discipline behind the trigger will always outweigh raw power. That is why the simplest truth in deer hunting remains unchanged. Shot placement is greater than caliber. So what do you actually need for whitetail deer hunting? Not the biggest cartridge on the shelf, not the loudest rifle in camp. What you need is a setup that works for you, consistently and confidently. First, choose a caliber you shoot accurately. Accuracy is not theoretical. It is proven on the range. If you can place 3 controlled shots into a tight group from a realistic hunting position, that caliber is doing its job. Confidence in your rifle translates directly to confidence in the field. Second, pick a recoil level you can truly manage. If the rifle makes you tense up or anticipate the shot, it is working against you. A manageable recoil impulse allows you to stay on target, maintain sight picture, and follow through properly. Control beats excess power every time. Third, use a bullet designed to expand. Modern hunting bullets are engineered to open reliably on impact, transfer energy efficiently, and penetrate through the vital zone. Expansion is what creates an effective wound channel and promotes a quick, ethical harvest. Finally, practice before the season starts. Practice from field positions, not just a bench. Know your zero. Know your trigger. Know how your rifle feels under pressure. When the moment comes, preparation removes doubt. That is what you actually need: accuracy, control, proper bullet design, and consistent practice. Everything else is secondary. As we wrap this up, remember this simple truth. You don't need the biggest rifle in camp. You need the one you shoot best. Whitetail hunting is not about impressing anyone with muzzle blast or cartridge size. It is about making a clean, ethical shot when the moment presents itself. The deer does not care what is stamped on your barrel. It only matters whether you place that bullet precisely into the vital zone. When you match your caliber to your ability, manage recoil effectively, and use a well-designed expanding bullet, you give yourself the best chance of a quick harvest. Confidence and control will always outperform excess power. That is what responsible hunting looks like. Now I want to hear from you. What caliber do you use for whitetail, and why? Share your real-world experience in the comments. Tell us your typical distances, your bullet choice, and what has worked for you over the years. I'm also pinning a question at the top. Is .223 enough for whitetail? Let's debate. Keep it respectful, keep it practical, and let's learn from each other as hunters.